Well, Boeing says it's pushing to put 737 MAX jets back in service, but there are no signs the Federal Aviation Administration is planning to give it a green light anytime soon. And there's a lot at stake for Boeing. The 737 is the fastest selling plane in the company's history. It sold 15,000 737s since the 1960s. The plane maker has now been forced to slash its 737 production from 52 per month to 42. Major carriers, including Southwest, American, and United Airlines, have cancelled MAX flights until January. Well, for a closer look at Boeing's outlook, let's bring in Mark Weiss. Mark is the Director of International Operations at Reagan AeroTech. Good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
So, as a former pilot yourself, what's your take on what you saw and heard today in the hearing?
It was kind of unnerving, to be very honest with you, to see the president, the head of Boeing, almost deny and not take responsibility for what seems to be a very obvious situation. This is something that should never have happened. And to me, it does say that what we've thought about all along is that safety starts with a dollar sign.
And that was the accusation, essentially putting profits ahead of safety. But as we look at sort of the steps that it took to really get the 737 MAX online, how much of that falls on Boeing versus, say, other people who are involved in the chain as well?
Well, going back, aviation is always the idea that accidents, incidents don't happen from a single cause. There's a systemic problem within the industry on how government and aircraft manufacturers are very cozy with each other. There's too much overlap with something like that. The idea that airlines, while they're businesses, you really have to understand that they're financial institutions with wings. Having Boeing come out with this model aircraft, it's about the 14th iteration of the 737. Basically, it's an aircraft that's airframe came out in the late 60s. It was there to get that airplane to compete with the Airbus A320 series of aircraft, and they rushed to get it out. And so this is really an outcome of putting profits and trying to get into the market as fast as they can, ahead of what I think is safety.
And we certainly heard some strong language from lawmakers. They included calling the 737 MAX a flying coffin. Others, Wall Street, for trying to really push this process ahead just to help shareholders. How is this fallout affecting not just Boeing's reputation, but sort of the industry as a whole?
Well, it certainly wants to make you take a step back and say, what the heck is going on with all of you, and slap everybody in the face and say, we really need to step back, reevaluate how we go through the process of putting an aircraft from start to finish and getting that into the air. So again, human beings are going to be very critical right now, but in a short period of time, this is going to be history, and it's going to, at least to some way, revert back to what's happened before. That's the sad part of it.
And we know for, obviously, the family members who, obviously, it was very tough to see them holding up pictures of the loved ones that were lost in the two crashes. What do things stand in terms of compensation for them or lawsuits? What do we know so far?
Well, Boeing has put aside a good deal of money, I think somewhere around $100 million, to compensate the families. There'll be more as it comes through the court system. It'll be through the courts over the next numbers of years. This is going to be a really big financial setback for Boeing. You had mentioned that they cut production, but there's a backlog of these aircraft of over 4,800 of them, and Boeing is supposed to start putting back into production not just the 42 that they had cut it from originally, but going up to about 57 airplanes in total per month. That's a lot of airplanes.
And obviously, this is a business that's not just a business of safety, but a business of trust. And a lot of people, as we're seeing more details coming out, are wondering, how does Boeing go about regaining customers' trust again?
Well, it's not just Boeing that has to do it. It's got to be Boeing and the airlines with the airline pilots, as well as the FAA and regulatory agencies globally. The tarnish that's hanging over the FAA at this moment is incredible. So that's going to take a long time to dissipate. It really will. It will, but it's going to take forever. The idea is, people, how comfortable are you going to be? How tarnished is Boeing's reputation? How quick are you going to get on an airplane when you see that companies are now saying, we're going to get that airplane back into the sky in January or February? and people will go out there and say, I'm not really sure I want to fly on a MAX airplane.
So then what does that do for companies like Southwest who really have sort of built their future on relying on this as the plane of the future? They thought this was going to be the workhorse plane of the future. What does this mean for its future then?
Well, Southwest in particular, who's been around almost 50 years, has been a Boeing 737 customer from the very beginning. That is what their fleet is. They're certainly going to be looking at perhaps going to Airbus for some of their equipment. But what it's really going to do, it's hopefully, it's going to focus the attention on how we get back to really being safety conscious in the air. I've been asked as a retired airline pilot, would I put my family or would I get on a MAX aircraft? The way I would get on a MAX airplane is when I know the pilots from my ex-airline feel comfortable getting into that cockpit, because believe me, we want to come home just as much as everybody else does. And I know the level of training that's required to fly a commercial airliner. And no pilot is going to put themselves, him or her, you treat your passengers like family. They're not going to put anybody in an airplane if they're not comfortable that the safety of that aircraft is not in question.
Well, hopefully some of these companies heed that same level of interest, and obviously the best of luck to the victims.
Absolutely.
In their compensation claims. Thank you so much.